Welcome to MyLife Chassidus Applied, episode 78. As we come from the 9 days, and we're from Chamishos above the full moon, as discussed in the previous episodes, as well as the Mamorim of Chassidus, where we derive all these ideas from, we are now in a process of an aliyah, of an elevation, after hitting so-called rock bottom, the low part, in our spiritual, psychological, emotional states, reflective in each in our own personal lives. We're now in the state where we begin to build and rebuild, going through the 15th of Av, and of course Mailam B'Kedesh, as we climb and we approach closer to the month of Elul, the Chedesh HaRachamim, which prepares us, of course, to the month of Tishrei, and so on. But as we always do, since it's now the period that we are approaching Chof of this coming Wednesday. Tazvav was Friday, so Wednesday will be Chof of, and the Shabbos afterwards is Parshas Eikev. Let's speak about something about this period. And the Rebbe, of course, connects Chof of, which is the Rebbe's father's yahrzeit in Tov Daled, which would make this the 71st yahrzeit from when the Levi Yitzchok Shneerson passed away tragically in Golos. Now, besides being the Rebbe's father, which is of course our connection to it, it's even deeper than that because the Rebbe made it very clear aggravation he had, and that he couldn't be there for his father for so many years. Remember, the Rebbe left Russia, Tofresh Peiches, I should say, right after Simchas Torah when the Frierdiker left. That means from Tofresh Peiches he never saw his parents again. Got married in Warsaw, even though they had a so-called parallel wedding celebration in their city, that of Levi Yekaterinoslav, which today is the Dnepropetrovsk, yet they never saw each other again. And the Rebbe would reunite with his mother, of course, in Tov Shin Zayin in Paris, we would bring her back to New York. But from that time, when exactly the Rebbe saw his father last, it's difficult to know. Whether he went back from Leningrad to wherever his father may have been. We're not sure exactly what year, but it definitely was a long time before he passed away. In all those years that Leivik was in Golos and arrested in the center of Talmata and Golos and so on, and all the travels that he went through and his different sufferings, which we'll discuss in a moment. So the Rebbe very visibly voiced his own so-called pain over the fact that he couldn't be there. The Rebbe would honor anybody who did anything for his father, who was mishamish him in any way, because essentially they were fulfilling the mitzvah of kibbud that the Rebbe so much wanted to fulfill. And we could see it from the way the Rebbe fulfilled it with his mother. The day that she came to New York, there was no day that passed until her passing, Bov Tishrei, Tov Shin Chafei, that the Rebbe wouldn't go visit her for a few minutes at least and give her a cup of tea. So we saw the kibbud aim that the Rebbe brought to her, and we could imagine from that the kibbud av. But when the Leivik's writings, which later would become the Kut Levi Yitzchok and Teres Levi Yitzchok, emerged from Russia approximately in the year 1960, the Rebbe was mechabedit, obviously his father's teachings. The Rebbe writes in many letters how it's his honor to publish them in a series of books, the Hagos of Leivik, different colors of ink, as the Rebbe pointed out many times. The Rebbe Tzachana would prepare ink from different herbs and from different plants because he had no ink, and we see it on the pages on the Gillian on the sides of the Zohar. So there's Aris HaZohar, there's Aris HaShas, HaMedrash, and in the recent years even we've discovered sometimes another page somewhere in a booklet or something, some other editions. And the Rebbe was not only published it, but then in the late 60s began to actually explaining first the Biyurim of Rav Levi and Tanya, then Ageres HaTshuva, and then the Biyurim of Rav Leivik and Kut Levi Yitzchok every week on the Zohar. The Rebbe became a fixture in every Fabrein after Tov Shin Lamed Aleph, that the Rebbe would explain a ha'ara from the Rav Leivik, just to show the demonstrated not just as a personal father, but he also connected it very much to his own messiahs, his own leadership. At the end of the day, he was the son of his father, and to the point that in later years, when they started singing the Gunim, when they would sing the Gunim at the end of the Fabrengens or any special Fabrengen, the Gunim from all the Rabbeim, the last Nigin, after Atav Chatan, which is the Rebbe's Nigin, would be Rav Leivik's Nigin, The Simcha stated again that the Rebbe also used in later years, one of the Hakafas, sometimes the first, sometimes the seventh, in the last years, that the Rebbe began that song as well. So we can elaborate a lot on this, but as far as some less applied Chassidus to our personal lives from Chof, which was so close to the Rebbe, so there's many sikhs to refer to. I wanted to just point out Tov Shem Mem Zayin, the Rebbe makes the connection between Tu B'Av and Chof in the sikhs of Chof that year. Shabbos Pasha Eikev was Chof. Tov Shem Mem Zayin is printed in Sefer HaSichos Tov Shem Mem Zayin. As a matter of fact, you find three different versions of three different excerpts of the Fabringen that the Rebbe spoke of that. And the main elaborate one is where he discusses the connection between Chof and Tu B'Av in the context that they both come out of a negative, comes in Aliyah. It's because Mrs. Tzadikim is like a Sreifas Beis Elokeinu. The passing of a Tzadik is like the burning of the Beis HaMikdash. And Tu B'Av is the tikkun of the burning of the Beis HaMikdash on the ninth of Av. Chof is like Sreifas Elokeinu, and the Aliyah through a Yahrzeit is what gives us the power to be able to elevate. But then he goes into even more intricate detail because the Rebbe brings, Chof is also mentioned in the Gemara as one of the 9 periods when they would bring carbon eitzim, it was called the Yom Tov. The Rebbe also refers to Chof as being 40 days for Chassidus Applied, before Rosh Hashanah. And then in some places they started saying Ksiv V'Chsiv Meteva from Chof and on. But more specifically in a Vedic way, the earliest time we know that, in the beginning when the Levi passed away, it was the Stalik in Tov Dalet. It wasn't clear what day in the week, what day in the month it was. It only became clear later. But the first thing that documented the Rebbe speaking about Chof is in Tov Ches. You have a letter from the Rebbe in Yiddishkeit, where the Rebbe refers to in volume 2. Let me refer to the page. In volume 2 in Yiddishkeit, page 371. What does he say there? That he talks about that the Fabringen of Chof, the Yahrzeit, discussed Asiyum on the Mishnayos that we say, the Yahrzeit Mishnayos in Masechta Kelim, Shloisha Trisim, the 3 type of shields. And the Rebbe explains it, Api Chassidus, Api Aveda. Interestingly, years later, we find in other letters from the Rebbe, but also more so, in Tov Shenun, the Rebbe gave a whole sikha on it, in Isru Chag, Simchas Teda, and explained that same idea, and many similarities, all the way back from Tov Ches. And from then on, every year there was a Fabringen Chof, a Fabringen that was covered the Yahrzeit, and usually began with a Hadron, with a Siyum in the Gemara, and became a fixture, as I said, in the Rebbe's Nesius, in many, many different ways. I want to just share one of the points from the Sikha from Chof, Tov Shem Mem Zayin. The Rebbe speaks about Chof as being a combination of Yud, which is like the name of Avaya. Yud, we write Avaya, we write Yud. It's a very fascinating and rare explanation in the 2 Yuds, Api Chassidus, Api Kabbalah, and of course Api the Torah of Leivik. There were people who had tinus sometimes. Rav Leivik, where's he taking these ideas from? He was once Fabringen. Someone said, where do you take the ideas from? He said, everything comes from Likutei Torah. Once heard this Fabringen in Leningrad that he had, and that was what he answered. And there are many, many stories that Rebbe would repeat. In that Sikha, in Eikev Tov Shem Mem Zayin, the Rebbe speaks also about a cruise, which even though it's not connected directly to Chof, but I just wanted to make mention of it because an interesting episode which I'd like to share. It's also connected to the summer. So the Rebbe speaks about Heirah from a cruise. He's referring to that a new pool that recently has been innovated to take people, Jews, on a cruise and use that for Afotzes Semyonos Chutz. So I was zeichet to prepare these sikhs at the time. The Rebbe edited them, but I don't remember. Recently, Rabbi Baumgarten, Label Baumgarten, out of East Hampton, reminded me the Parsha because it was it was a connection to a pool that he did. So he was planning a cruise with his balabat, with his people, one evening, and it was a way to keep people like a type of party, a type of an event. He wrote to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe wrote back to him, Hashayches l'Teira mitzvahs. What's the connection between a cruise between Teira and mitzvahs? So he, of course, when we know that Rebbe asked a question like that, it means probably stay away from the whole thing. For some reason, he called me. They said, I just recently heard it from him. I don't remember the details, but now I do know them. It's a very interesting lesson here from all of this, which is not necessarily connected directly to Chavova. Maybe it is. We'll discuss that in a moment. And he said to me, what should we do? So I said, well, generally, when the Rebbe says, Teira mitzvahs, there's no reason to continue on with the cruise. So he says, but it's really, I will make it a Teira mitzvahs. he asked me to help him respond to the Rebbe. I really was not comfortable doing so, but since I was not signing it, he was signing it, I was just writing it for him. So, you know what? I said to him, I think Krichen sometimes the Rebbe is negating it, that's the way he negates it, so maybe better not to get involved. But for some reason, he felt that he wants to respond. I thought about it, so I wrote an edel way to the Rebbe. As I said, he signed it, saying that today one of the ways that people respond to get them to be Moshech Levavo, to draw them and attract them to Chassidus and to Yiddishkeit, is to take them on a cruise. It's a comfortable type of like entertaining event. But obviously, be connected to Teda, Vedas, and Milton Al-Sadn, the Rebbe's Hiras. Everything should be connected with saying some Divrei Teda, with saying a Tefillah, Kapitel Tilim, and giving tzedakah, doing some other mitzvah, and of course Achotas Tevis, and all to be used toward Avodas Hashem. And I mentioned as Elohoyed that the Teres of Baal Shem Tov, that everything is of course Hashgacha Pratis and lessons in Avodas Hashem. There's actually in Baal Shem Tov lessons in Chassidus, in Kabbalah, in Zohar even. Talk about Yena. It talks about the lessons from boats, from ships, from cruises, in a sense, from a boat that you can learn for Yiddishkeit Hashem Beguf. The Yevdan years beyond the Torah from the Baal Shem Tov, and I mentioned a few of these Torahs that obviously can also be incorporated. The Rebbe did not respond. I believe he responded to the Chiyuv to do it. But that Shabbos, the Rebbe spoke this Sikha. What's so amazing is this is just consistent with the Rebbe's approach to things. That the Rebbe was saying, "What's a Shachs to Torah?" And in Echanam, no Shachs, you don't do such a thing. But there was nothing Hepech HaTorah, Kachaz B'Shalom, in doing a cruise. But the Rebbe elicited elicited the need to explain what is the connection. And once it was explained, the Rebbe didn't just accept it. He spoke a whole sikha. It's printed in Sefer HaSichos Toshim Zayin, a fascinating sikha literally about Til Al Hayam. That's what it's called. The title Al Vahiros Ba'Veda Til Al Hayam. Eikev Chof of Toshim Zayin, page 543. Interesting lessons there. It's a short sikha that it's kedai to learn. Also relevant, of course, to the summer months. The connection to Chavav, Parshas. Remember, Chavav, as I said, is a time where you have a transformation from the negative to the positive. And there's the fascinating Shima from Rav Leibik. In the Haggadah, it's printed in the beginning of the his Oris to Tanya, where he writes, Ani Levi Yitzchak, he writes about his predicament. And he connects his name, his Yemeledes, his life experiences, all his exiles, to the idea of Gvuras. Remember, Levi and Yitzchak are both Gvura. And both of those connect to his life, a life of Gvuras. Excuse me. And of course, Hamtokas HaGvuras, which is the goal to sweeten the severities. So he was not Zeich in his lifetime for such sweetening, but he uses his name in all his events in that connection. The Rebbe has Biyurim in many different sikhs, explanations of that fascinating achievement of a man who, in the worst of times, how did he look at his negativity? He turned that itself into Torah. That itself became a Torah of Chassidus. Similar what the Rebbe brings about the Frierdiker Rebbe when he was in prison. He based Tammuz, before he based Tammuz, and they asked him, "Do you know where you are?" He says, "Yes, I'm in a place that's Potter from the mezuzah." The Rebbe explained that gufa that he says Potter from the mezuzah, that itself is Mamshech Elikus, because that's halacha. Rav Leivik took his situation and turned that itself into chiyuv. And if you look at the Rebbe's approach to 9 days, in general to negative experiences, you could see, even though it's general theme of Chassidus, the fine light in the deepest darkness, but Rav Leivik epitomized it and embodied literally that experience in his life, as the Rebbe would very often say about how difficult his life was. When they showed the Rebbe the picture, the initial picture of Rav Leivik in the last years, the Rebbe wrote the question mark, "What is this, my father?" Later they found another picture, which was also a painful picture when he was arrested, but that was closer to him, even though the Rebbe also referred that it seems like he's not feeling well there too. But regardless, Rav Leivik is a permanent element in Chassidus Chabad, being the father of the Rebbe, became part of, as I said, part of the Fabrengens, the Negunim, the Torah of Rav Levi Yitzchak, and the Rebbe later in the years also in the Maimorim, when he would bring sight from all the Rabbeim, would also cite something from his father. And his Torah, of course, has so many similarities to the Rebbe's approach, connecting things to people's names, the Kaftar Uferach connection of everything, Alpi Kabbalah and Alpi Nigla, all the ties, all the knots tied, I should say, all the threads connected, and you see the contribution of Reb Leivik in the Rebbe's life in so many different ways. Practical Atheist, the Rebbe speaks there about Reb Leivik using this time, coming from Tu B'Av and Chof and Teda, which we begin learning more Teda after Tu B'Av, as the Gemara says. Chof and Stok and Chof and Ahavas Yisrael, which is part of Korban Eitzim of Chof. There's a theme also of Avdus and Ahavas Yisrael, as the Rebbe explains that Sikh. So Chof is an opportunity, 71st Yortzeit, Aliyah of Reb Leivik, the Rebbe's father, to add the Chlal and Teda, the Primus Teda, which was his main koch, as a Vukubal, and of course bring it all down, the Maisa, which is the whole point of Applied Chassidus. Now connecting it to Parsha Eikev, let me share one of the Chidushim of the Rebbe. There's always the Geshmak is the Rebbe's Chidushim, and that is in the Sikh Chelik Tes Parsha of Eikev, the Kutei Sichos Chelik Tes, based on the Maimorim and the Sichos of the Rebbe Achnosh HaPesach Tavshin Chafei. The Chassidus speaks about Eikev. Eikev has many meanings, but Eikev also comes from the word Eikev as an Eikev, the heel. So it refers to like Eikev, the heel, which is the lowest part of the human body, that the Avos D'Rab Nosson refers to the Malach HaMov Shabbat. So it's considered to be like the why? Because it's it's callous in the sense where it almost doesn't have any life. That's why it hits the ground, and it's able to absorb. Any other part of the body has much more Edelkeit and refinement. The heel is considered the place that is the lowest, the least giluyim, the least hergish, the least feelings, is the heel of the foot, as we see, and that's why it has such resilience. Ikvis is the Mashiach, of course. It reminds us that the last days of Golus is called Eikev of Mashiach, the heels of Mashiach. Why? Because Seder Shtalshus of history is structured like a human body, with Adam Arishon at the beginning, Gan Eden like the Reish, the head, working way down of the bitter, the refinement of the entire structure of the human body, which is of course created B'Tselem Elokim, a microcosm of all of Seder Shtalshus, the Adam Elyon, all the way working that go through all the generations, and that all the empires. Kesser of Klippa is Mitzrayim. The other, Daniel talks about the other Goliath, the Goliath of Yavon, the Goliath of Parshas Mada, the Goliath of Edom, of course, and the Goliath Bavel, I should have mentioned. And then finally, the latter part of the Goliath, which is the later years, is called Eikev, because that's when we're refining the lowest parts of the system, at the bottom of the pot. So when it comes to Eikev, Chassidus gives an example. The famous Maimor of Eina Kodesh Baruch Hu Baba Tfunya in Briesa of Tafresh Mem Ches, famous Maimor where the Rebbe Rashab extols the virtues of Anoshim Shutim. So comparing it to an Eikev, the Reish B'nai Yisrael are the leaders. The Eikev refers to the Anoshim Shutim, the simple people who don't have Gilui. Similar to what you spoke about the Dal and Minim on Sukkis. So you have the Esrik has both taste and smell. So it refers to someone who has Torah and mitzvahs. And the other extreme is the Arava, which has neither taste nor smell. So it has very little revelation, very little conscious and spiritual awareness. So Chassidus brings a mashal that though it's lacking any Gedulim, because of that, it's also about Mesiras Nefesh. That's where you find Mesiras Nefesh. That's why, using an example, that when you put your body into a hot bath, what do you put first? You don't put your head. The most sensitive, the most precious part. You put the foot to test the water, because the foot is less sensitive, and therefore that's where you test hot water with. So where's the Koyach of Mesiras Nefesh is in the Eikev. That's why in the later generation of Mesiras Nefesh is far a stronger component. When there isn't Giluin, you don't have Meichen and Midas and all the faculties at work. So Rabbi Friedrich speaks in the Maimorim of Pesach, Keldei di Tavshin Tes. That's a Chanhoid. The Ved is Hoid. Well, like in Bosel Legari, Tavshin Yud, the Anoshim Shutim, the Anshe Tzova, that they Dafka are given the Vazbaz, Bizbaz, Eitzes, the splurging of all the treasures of the king. He gives to whom? To the simple foot soldiers that march in front, the infantry. Okay, so in that context, that's the Eikev. So there's two ways to understand this. But Parshas explain why is the Eikev Mesiras Nefesh, because it doesn't have Gilui. If it had Seichel, is Astira Telakus, as sometimes it says. What means Astira? Because when you use your mind, Your mind is really what's comprehending and appreciating. Where someone who doesn't have the mind or midas or feelings or intellectual connection, all they have is Kabbalah Sale. Because of the lack of Giluyim, that's why they are able to have more Mesiris Nefesh. But it's not because they directly have more Mesiris, because they don't have an impediment in the way. The famous Moshel of the Baal Shem Tov on the Pasuk Tfil Ani and the Fnei Hashem Yashbech Psyche. What's the Moshel? The Moshel of the two people invited to see the king, one an aristocrat, intelligent, educated, literate person. The other is a pauper ignoramus. They never saw the king before, so it's a great opportunity. Once in a lifetime comes the Chochem, the wise one, the Reish, and he gets so spoiled from the king's palace, from the treasures, from the paintings, from the literature, from the music, all his collections, he misses his appointment. Comes the Ish Pasha, he walks in, he doesn't appreciate any of it, because he has no Gilui, Eikev. And he marches straight into the chamber of the king's chamber, the king's antechamber, Armin HaMelech, and has his audience with Etzem itself, Anon Nesiv Malka, the Etzem itself. And he asked the Eibishter to give him a blessing to appreciate everything else, all the Gilui. With that, that's why Tfillah, when you pray, suspend all your aristocrat, your aristocracy, your literacy, your sophistication, and just stand like a simple child. This is not advocating illiteracy. It's suspending it in order to appreciate deeper things that your mind and your emotions, in a conscious way, perhaps cannot grasp. Less machshava tfisa beikla. So what's machshava? Machshava will grasp God as He manifests in thought, in ideas, in intellect, in emotions, in things that we can relate to, in definitions. But you want to experience God beyond definitions, true transcendence, beyond intellect. Less machshava tfisa beikla. I will. You can't grasp him with thought, but with that an essential desire of the heart that every simple person has. So the you can learn pshat in this, that because you don't have the Giluyim, it's like when you don't have the light shining, you have the core. But not because you have a direct relationship with the core more than others. Anyone can have the connection if they put aside their Giluyim that do not allow you to access the core, the essence. Comes the Rebbe in Tavshin Chof Hey, it says Eikev is deeper than that. Based on a Maimer in Torah and Hashemayim Kisi, the Rebbe says it's mashma from there that the Eikev is actually a keli for Etzem. Not just that because it has no Giluyim, therefore the Etzem shines through it, but it's a keli. It's pshitus. It's not just it doesn't have the negatives. It itself is a container. And the Sikha and Chelik Zayin Shmini, the Rebbe explains it more about Arichas, that based on those Sikhas. That means that the Helam itself becomes a Keli. So Ish Pasha isn't just not lacking, since he's lacking Giluyim, so he has the Etzem. No, he becomes a Keli to it. That's why the Baal Shem Tov says that an Ish Pasha, the simple person, touches Pshittus HaAtzmus. The Rebbe explains in a Shmois Tavshin Chafei what that means. Interesting Sikha there. Now is not the time to go into it, but I'm just referring some footnotes and sources to look up, explaining what the idea is. What does it mean to us? It means that even though we're in this so-called Sisena Lerehinu, we don't see miracles. We may not have all the Lamadregas and levels that they had in previous generations. So it's not just that we don't have those gloom. Therefore, all we have left is nothing left. We have that for the Etzem. No, there's some positive element in our generation, in the Eikev, in the Mesiris Nefesh of Levik, of Chafov, that allows a deeper chesed to be revealed, dafke, in this place. Dafke, when it's concealed, that's where the chesadim, the deepest chesadim, the deepest kindness and compassion is revealed. Which, applying it to our lives, is that when a person goes through a difficult time, painful moment, a setback, it's not just you say, okay, this is a stepping stone to growth, but there's something that is in the experience itself that allows you to touch something on the essence level, essential level that you can never touch when things are going well. This is not a consolation to suggest in any way that we should embrace and look forward to negative things. It's after the fact how to approach it, which is the approach of Chassidus, to see the positive in everything. But here's a deeper take, not just to see the positive in everything, but to realize that even the negative is actually a container. And in some way, just like Giluyim are a container for the Giluyim of Elokus. When you learn Torah, it's a revelation of God's wisdom. When you daven, it's a revelation of God's feelings. When you love God, you're drawing down the chesed of Elokus. But it's deeper than that, that when Malchus, which doesn't have anything of its own, Malchus, less klum, like the moon, has no light of its own, that itself makes it a keli. Not just because it doesn't have anything else, it makes it a container to that deeper core. Now, let's move on to some topics. I wanted to make an announcement. I should have made it at the outset, but I'll say it again. I'll say it now. My Life is available now as a podcast. It can be streamed or downloaded from our site. When you go to mymeaningfullife.com/mylife. And I want to begin with a few questions that have been coming in, and it's really been pouring in, to be honest. But I'm not going to address it today. I'll just bring it up with the question. I'd like to hear your feedback on this, and any thoughts you have, and any questions you may have, and we'll address it in the coming weeks. It's a sad event. It's a sad topic, but it must be addressed. Like anything that touches people must be addressed. That's what the Chassidus are for, is not to shy away from issues that affect us all. So here's what some writers have been writing here. In light of the recent tragic suicide of Figi Meir and other such tragedies, can you please speak about the taboo topic of mental illness that is plaguing so many families? The tragedy is compounded by the fact that the issue carries such a stigma that it remains shrouded in silence and darkness, with even the families infected themselves suffering in solitude and shame. MyLife Chassidus Applied has become a highly respected forum for addressing controversial issues in a sensitive, sensible, and Torah-based fashion. You are one of the first, if not the first, to openly address the issue of child molestation, which has been brought to the forefront and is at least beginning to be discussed. I don't know if you're aware of the tremendous following you have in very many different circles. I therefore feel that if you were to take on the topic of mental illness, it would go a tremendous way at opening this issue up, which though in and of itself may not solve the problem, but is the beginning of the healing process in the areas that we humans have control over. Not to mention the relief to those suffering and their families. So my response is yes, we will address this in coming weeks. And it's very true. Collateral damage, there's things we can't control, but there's many things that we could. The collateral damage often is worse than the original problem, like any infection. Something is an issue, and then it creates side effects, follow-up issues, how families deal with it, how we look at it, which can only compound, as this writer writes, and make the collateral damage much worse. So we will tackle this, but I'd like to, before I do so, if you can send in, if any of you have anything from the Rebbe, or from Chassidus, or any answers or thoughts, for that matter, about this topic, I really would like to see it all, as much as I can, learn from what you have to say, and anything, of course, from the Rebbe himself. Additionally, if you have any questions on this topic, more specific, please send them in anonymously to our forum, meaningfullife.com/mylife. And even though, as I said, I'd rather not have to talk about this, but being that I hear again and again the questions being asked, and time has come to address it in the best possible way, and how does Torah Chassidus look at it, and we are here to help each other. Many people who may not have this issue, thank God, but many do, and it's something that needs to be talked about in the proper Torah Chassidus way. So this will be addressed in the coming weeks. And again, I beseech from all of you, if anybody has anything to say on this topic, especially any answers from the Rebbe, anything that you'd like to share. If it's confidential, you don't have to use names. Obviously, if you want to share with me, it will remain completely confidential as far as personal level, but that benefit many others. I think it behooves us all to do whatever we can to address this topic and to provide anything we may be able to contribute. Let us go now to some questions I will address now. Also, not always easy ones, but let's get to it. The question of what defines the word Frum. Question 1. The terms Frum and not Frum are thrown around very freely. But what do they mean? Who is Frum? Is it someone who keeps Shabbos, eats kosher, wears a sheitel? What about people who outwardly appear religious but don't practice Ahavas Yisrael? People who wear a beard and all Shemein Levushim, but then cheat in business. Are they considered Frum? Or conversely, someone who may not look or dress the part, but is a mensch, honest, refined, and meticulously treats people with kindness and integrity. Can you please address this question and define what is Frumkeit, and can we even say who's really Frum today? Thank you. In the same vein, question number 2. Though I grew up in a strictly observant home, I left it all as a teenager and did not truly discover God until I left my tradition on my own spiritual journey. I then came to realize that perhaps my family was not really Frum, but simply conforming to a cultural standard. Perhaps my upbringing was basically a culture of religion and its rituals as opposed to a developed relationship with God and one's soul. My family and community have coined people like me as going OTD, off the derech. But I wonder what derech they truly follow. Rabbi Jacobson, seeing that you are open to all types of questions as opposed to the closed-minded environment that I grew up in, that ostracized me for independent thinking and asking questions, I hope it would not be sacrilegious to ask you to address this controversial but vital issue of whether Judaism is a cultural experience, focusing on externals, or whether it is something more. And if so, why do so many in the Orthodox world not get it? And finally, question 3, in this same family, so to speak, of the questions. Rabbi Jacobson, here's something I've pondered for many years in my encounters with all kinds of people. Why do spiritual people tend to not be that religious, and religious people not that spiritual? Are the two mutually exclusive? Okay. There's a story I heard in the name of a Mrs. Denberg, who was a funder and dedicated Yal Ir Tehillim, Shemus of Tzemach Tzedek Tehillim. And she was by the Frierdiker Rebbe in Yiddishkeit, and Frierdiker Rebbe was thanking her for her support. He was giving her, shitting her with all kinds of brachas and blessings. And suddenly she began to cry. In the middle of all the brachas, beautiful brachas, she began to cry. And the Frierdiker Rebbe said, "Was wait? Why are you crying?" And she said, "Rebbe, ich bin nicht frum." And she was embarrassed, ashamed that the Rebbe was giving her all these brachas that her schus, people will learn, schus, people will grow, become leaders. Everything that she was doing for helping Yiddishkeit. So she was embarrassed, so she said, "Rebbe, ich bin nicht frum." And the Rebbe responded, the Frierdiker Rebbe said, "Mein Tochter, heinz Tag, wissen wir nicht, wer ist frum." Today, we don't know who is frum. One story. There is a story with, I just recently heard, someone was in Yiddishkeit by the Rebbe, and he comes from a Chassidic family. He was more modern, but he was a Chassidic Yid, a Chassidic home, and he was telling the Rebbe he lives in Israel. One of the aggravating, difficult things, which is 1955, Tafshin Tezvav. One of the aggravating things for him is that he sees Jews that are Russians, not Shemer Shabbos, not Chaz v'Shalom to throw stones. He says that's what some people do is completely crazy. But what should be the attitude? How do you do something? How do you react to that? So the Rebbe responded that he had the same question when he lived in Leningrad. Frierdiker Rebbe was in Leningrad. No, he was in Leningrad from Tofresh Pei Dalet till Tofresh Pei Zayin Ches, when he left Russia. That's where he was arrested. He said that Frierdiker Rebbe lived, because Chassidim came to Fabrenger and all that, but there were also Jews that lived in the area that were not Shemli Shabbos, Shemli Torah Mitzvahs, on a revealed level at least. And the Rebbe would have, the Rebbe said he had the same question, what should be the attitude? So he says, I asked my father-in-law, the Frierdiker Rebbe, and the Frierdiker Rebbe said, I'm a treft Aiden, was Reichet Shabbos, Rachmon al-Islam. You meet a Jew who's smoking on Shabbos, darf man zugehen zu him, you have to go over to him, and sagen ihm a Hatziken und warm and good Shabbos, to say a heartfelt and warm good Shabbos. And that will touch his neshama, so it'll have its pull, it'll have its effects. I mean, there are many stories that talk about this approach. I'm not going to elaborate all of them. I want to go back to the issue of Vesnish versus what's meant for. The Gemara talks in Brachas, Chassidus cites this, Gamba Pumachtat Rachmanakari, a Ganef that davens to the Eibishter and prays that he should help him succeed in his theft. Chassidus asked an obvious question. That's insanity. You want to not listen to God's rules, fine, but you're going to pray to God, invite him in to be a partner with you in doing something he told you not to do. So Chassidus explains, because Amunah is makiv, is what we call dissonance. You have faith. It's in one place. It's not integrated and internalized in your life. So you can technically have a deep faith and follow it all, but it hasn't affected you. We could say that the whole Baal Shem Tov, it says he came to waken up the Salfos, the Jews were in a state of faint, a comatose state, was they were ashamed of Torah mitzvahs, but it was losing the neshama. Maybe it was just the beginning, it get a lot worse. So there's the body of Judaism and there's the soul of Judaism. The body of Judaism is the mechanics, the rituals, as you write, as one of the writers writes here. But then there's a soul to it, and if you lose the soul or you don't have the soul, God forbid, yes, it could become ritualistic and cultural. That doesn't mean that mitzvahs are cultural. It means people are behaving in that fashion. And it's unfortunate trap that people can get into. It's a comfort zone. You grow up in a community, everyone does something. So this becomes the herd mentality, ritualistic, mechanical, robotic, and brainless Judaism, you can say. To say is it better than nothing? In some ways it is, if it's at least done in a healthy way. But absolutely it can be a major turnoff because you see people are not experiencing it in a soulful way. Remember the Rebbe once, I remember which Fabrengen it was, the Gemara in Yerushalmi says that there was an Eid, he came into shul, he heard Menaf Shekara. He automatically would bow. So everyone would see that as a virtue, right? He doesn't even have to think about it. He's bowing automatically. And at that time, the Rebbe explained that it's also a negative. If you see negative, don't avoid it. It became a habit. It's like brushing your teeth, lahav. So on one hand, yes, better having that habit than other habits. But the Alter Rebbe explains in Perek Tazvav and Tanya, as you saw, Eved Elikim is dafke when you mishana something. It has to be a chiddush, not the gilus. Even if you learn 100 times, and that's the custom, it's not called Eved Hashem. It's called not serving. And then why is Alter Rebbe saying it? Because that would be a trap. Yes, is it good for a person to have a cultural Jewish experience? Better than not having it. But yes, it has a big downside. So my response to all of these questions is the following. To say who's Frum, I never heard from the Rabbeim or Chassidus that they write down here's a list of criteria who's Frum. You look in Torah, the biggest mitzvah of all is Avos Yisrael, hands down. Klal Gadol B'Torah in the language of Rabbi Akiva, Zui Kol HaTorah Kul in the language of Hillel, in Gemara and Shabbos. That's hands down the biggest mitzvah of all. If you want to talk about Al Tehei Shekel, you're not supposed to measure mitzvahs. But if you want to talk about what's called the Klal Gadol, the foundation of it all, there you have it. And then there's others. There's Kula Kenevet Kol HaMitzvahs, there's Huksha Kol HaTorah Kul HaTfilm, Mezuzah Shabbat. Each one has their... Every one, the Rambam says even one mitzvah, one iota. Remember, at the end of the day, every detail is connected to the whole. That's why the Rabbi Chof and Chassidus explains, and the Rebbe explains, you do one mitzvah, Esik b'mitzvah, Pratim in a mitzvah, because all the mitzvahs are connected to Ratzon Elyon, and you can't separate Ratzon Elyon into parts. So on Giluyim level, on our dimensions, you can say this mitzvah, that mitzvah. That's why there is Kala Kichamura. There's lighter, more lenient, and more strict. But overall, they're all connected to that. So, but the bottom line is that if you do it just ritualistically, you do it just mechanically, that's when you're lacking the neshama part. So it's not just the rotzon element. You have to have not just the amunah, it has to come down in a detailed application. So unfortunately, we don't use the word Frum, as the Fridi could have said very clear, because you can have one person as Avos Yisrael, maybe they're the frumst person on earth. And especially when you go to Perek Lamed Beis in Tanya, and you see what does he say in Perek Lamed Beis in Tanya? He says, Mi yodei gedu losnu ma losnu. So sitting around the table right now, who's the greatest soul right now in your proximity? Who knows? We can never know. So how could you start defining intensity and greatness? You could talk about somebody who's acting on it, because just having a soul, every soul, even a thief has a soul, even a criminal has a soul. Then there's fanning the flames of the soul that it becomes actualized in our day-to-day lives. So essentially the answer is we shouldn't be categorizing and judging people, saying this one's Frum, that one's not Frum. Because first of all, no one pointed us to be such a judge or such the arbiter. Who pointed anybody? If you're already going to discuss it, I don't think you can make the decisions based on which mitzvahs exactly you're going to determine. There was a journalist who knew my father well. And after my father passed away, we met her in Israel. She told me that when she met my father years ago in 1960, they were at a press conference. And she was anti-religious, as she put it. She said she was a brash, abrasive Israeli journalist. She went over to my father, who was a bearded yarmulke-wielding Jew, and said to him, we'll respect each other professionally. We're both new journalists on the scene here. But you should always know, I don't like religious people. I don't like religion. My father tells her, this is how she repeated it, said to her, do you honor your parents? Yes. Do you visit the sick? Yes. You give charity? Yes. You're more religious than I. And she suddenly realized, she was so embarrassed. It changed her life. So to define who's Frum, who's not Frum, is a very despicable type of approach where we're judging and we're determining it based on our standards as if your standard is the only standard that exists. So that whole attitude is definitely a turnoff and can have negative implications. And yes, and just like these writers write, I'm not going to say that everybody's responsible for their behavior. You can't start scapegoating anyone else. But as parents and as communities, we have to take this to heart, that this does not have always positive impact. Your intentions may be to keep everybody in line and not feel threatened and be very paranoid in that sense. But at the end of the day, it's not a Torah Chassidus approach to life. Because Torah Chassidus tells us how to approach things. So, in the final analysis, I would say that there's the body of Yiddishkeit, Gufa Daraisa, and there's Nashmasa Daraisa. Just like a Guf needs a Neshama, without it it's a corpse, it's dead, or cultural, or mechanical, but a soul also needs a body. Transcendence needs to be grounded, and the grounding is through the practical mitzvahs, Eikev. So to suggest that it's only escaping into a spiritual state and losing sight, the beauty of Judaism, as opposed to other schools of mysticism, as the Rebbe writes in a letter to a mystical conference on Jewish mysticism in England. He writes that to touch the divine, it's printed in the book To Touch the Divine in the beginning, that what's unique about Jewish mysticism is that you can touch God more through action than through a meditation. So we need both. And the fact that the mechanical Judaism is done in an unhealthy way, so those of us that discover the truth have to not reject, throw out the baby with the bathwater. So do the rituals, do the mitzvahs, do the traditions in the right way. Infused with the soul, a fusion between body and soul. That has to be the revolution. But to appreciate and be sensitive to the realities that were written here, they're painful. Some people do focus on externals, and it could be a major turnoff. But ultimately, Judaism is a combination of these two elements. Let's go on to the next question, which is related to this. I grew up in a very Chassidic home. Is your reputation more important than your children? Okay. I grew up in a very Chassidic home. Today I'm no longer observant, and a big cause of it was not the Yiddishkeit per se, but my parents. When I began to explore and seek, they were far more, if not entirely, concerned with their image and what others would think, than my welfare and being there for me. All I would hear is about their rigidity and how I am a huge source of embarrassment to them. Today they treat me like a pariah and prefer that I stay away, especially when they have friends or community members around. It makes me sick to my stomach. My parents care more about their reputation than me. What type of Judaism is it that ignores the cries of a child? Please speak about this, not just for me, but for many who struggle with this painful issue. Question 2. I really struggled with the yeshiva system and asked my parents if we could find a better solution for my education. I was not interested in dropping out of the system altogether, but rather finding something that better fit my skills and needs. However, their response was, how is that going to reflect on us and the family? I'm struggling with whether I must honor my parents' desire that I just swallow it, or I should follow my gut that they are being selfish and do what is best for me. Question number 3. I have made certain decisions in my life that are different than my parents and what they wanted from me. As a result, I feel they are ashamed of me and don't want me around. How can I express to them that I am their child and they should respect my decisions, love me regardless, and not feel like they are being judged based on me? Yeah, a big question. I've heard it so many times, very painful to hear. I want to make one big disclaimer, as always. It's case by case, very difficult to speak in sweeping terms, because To start blaming just parents and saying the parents are always at fault, it's usually not the case. It doesn't mean parents don't deserve to take responsibility, especially for children. And it's again case by case. I have seen scenarios where parents, to their own insecurities, and their own fears, and their own comfort zone, that's how they look at it. They're very narcissistic, and it's all about their reputation. Yes, it's very destructive. It's not even a religious question. I've seen it in the secular world as well. A parent is more important. How am I going to shine? What will I look like if my child doesn't go to a certain school, or doesn't get a certain salary, or doesn't look this way? This is damage that has been done. It's nothing to do with the religious world. So let's just state that also for the record. That this is not about any particular group. Everyone has these challenges. So we have to separate it. The fact that some people use it in the world of Frumkeit, that's the levush, so to speak. How religious you look, how you bear it, what clothing you wear, and so on. That's just the happens to be the manifestation of the religious circle, but it's coming from the same root. If we're indeed talking about a parent or parents who suffer from these type of insecurities, and it's all about reputation and image. So remember, it's long before they had children they were this way. They also live that way. They don't probably even follow their own voice and heart. They do what others want of them. Now there's a concept of al-tifresh min hatzibur, we understand that not to stand out and not to exclude yourself from the community, but that's a healthy statement, not one that comes from unhealthy sources. If it's coming from an unhealthy place of self-obliteration, and obliterating others in the name of so-called just looking good, there's a lot of problems with that. So that needs to be balanced, and we've discussed this idea of individuality and bittul, healthy bittul versus unhealthy bittul. But often this is the problem, and I say this to the children who are grown up writing here. These are all children writing that are clearly adult children at this point. If indeed your parents are that way that I just described, yes, it may have had an impact on you, but now it's time to take responsibility for your life. What does responsibility mean? Say, you know what, my parents have their shortcomings. I'm saying even if this is the case, and I want to qualify that because it's not always the case. They have their shortcomings, but they did many good, beautiful things for me. They provided for me. They loved me. And that's their limitation. They have, let's say, myopic vision or some other narrow-mindedness about certain things. Or maybe coming from even good intentions. They think they know best for you. So in a cordial, respectful way, as you grow older and you move out of the house, and hopefully marry, you don't have to reject them. You have to find in kind ways, without reciprocating, without engaging in battle, of thinking for two people in a way. Say, you know what, dad, or ta, or pop, or mom, or whatever it is, I respect you, I hear what you're saying, I'll discuss it with my spouse, I have children, and so on. This doesn't always mean it will succeed, but it's most important to deflect the issue, because we all have to honor our parents. Even the worst type of parents have to be honored, not necessarily for them, but for the life they've given us and the blessings they've given us. And most importantly, for your own health and your own welfare. You don't want to become engaged in this type of reciprocal battle, even if you're right. So it's important to understand that this is a phenomenon that exists in human nature. At the same time, it's not Jewish. It's nothing to do with Judaism. Just because you may have had teachers, or parents, or adults in authorities who so-called have this attitude, this doesn't mean that they're representing Yiddishkeit. So therefore, to say, I'm rejecting the whole thing, no. Why don't you represent Yiddishkeit the way it should be? Why don't you bring up children that will be encouraged by you to find their voice within Yiddishkeit, to become a secure, confident person in their Yiddishkeit and Chassidus and mitzvahs, daily mitzvahs and Chassidus. That's the healthy approach. So so there's like two unhealthy ways you can be involved in such a situation. Either you just follow your parents' conformity and you also become basically a brainless follower in that sense, and reputation and image is more important than anything else. Or you battle it and go the other extreme, or you find the third approach, the healthy approach to Yiddishkeit, where we respect and we realize it's not just about reputation. We realize it's not just about my insecurities and securities. It's about what the Eibishter wants. And sometimes you have a child that's a little different than other children. So what are you going to do? Change the child because of the reputation? People are going to say, this child is different. This child has Down syndrome. This child is very eccentric. This child has other issues. Insecure people do that. They hide with shame. Shame-driven Judaism is a very unhealthy force. It has to be driven by pride. And for us to solve this problem is not to fight it or to become part of it, but to find the third alternative, which is what really is to be a proud Jew, an individual Jew. Everyone that stood by Mount Torah heard the Torah Loshen Yachid, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, Ana Elokeichem, because it spoke to them personally. Now, some people may never get it. You know something? You choose your battles. If someone can't get it, a parent can't get it, so be it. If all their life is about reputation, you know something? Fight your own battles. It's not your battle. And when I'm speaking to parents, I would say, if you can hear what I'm saying and not take it as a critique, look at it as a constructive approach. You have to look at yourself. If you're a real Torah Jew, a Chassidic Jew, are you really think that reputation is the number one thing? Your child is the most important thing. You have to care for your child, the love for the child. Yes, part of it is, this is how we do things. Fine, so you need to find the balance. But should there ever come an impression that your reputation, your image is more important than your child's welfare? That's not good if your children think that way. Now, if it's wrong, so correct it. If they're wrong, the children, that is, then we have to find a way to correct it. Maybe they're getting the wrong impression, but if they're right, something that all Heshav Levavos Abon, we have to learn from. I heard from someone, community, who literally is estranged from his family, because that's exactly what his father told him. His father told him, "You are embarrassing me. I am so and so and so. People look to me as a leader. You're embarrassing me." He says that was what the straw that broke the camel's back. He left. He doesn't even talk to his father anymore. Of course, he's pained by it. I'm sure his father is also pained, but his father is living in his little world. That's how he lives. The reputation. Now, he'll give a whole kind of explanation. It's not about reputation. He gave his price, he gave his nefesh and all that. But I happen to know the situation. I know in this case, I cannot say it always takes two to tango, but the father is definitely a big part of it. Because that's how he lives. And there are people who their children become their pawns just to make them shine. It's usually insecure people who are that way. Secure parents bring up secure children. Now, if you're someone that growing up in a home like that or grew up in a home, it's your responsibility to figure out how to not perpetuate the cycle into the next generation, to stop it, to learn to become secure, to learn to become confident. Of course, the question is, how do you do that? That's not for this episode. We'll talk about it, and I'm happy to address that. If you send questions in, again, send them to meaningfullab.com/mylife. You can ask any question you like, following up, new questions, and so on. We still have, let's see here, where do we have to go? A follow-up to laziness and homeschooling, which I'm going to do is push that to next week, even though I've pushed it already. I don't like to do that, but I do want to address the Chassidic question of the day, of the week I should say, which is which goes as follows. And then there's the essays we need to still do. The Chassidic question of Chassidus is this. How can we explain the four worlds, Atzilus, Bri, Yitzir, Asiya, in personally relevant terms? So I want to begin firstly referring everyone to a letter, a fascinating letter, Yiddishkeit, volume 2, the Rebbe, page Shin Ayin Gimel, 373. It goes to 375. It's a letter to Rabbi Leibel Bistutsky, who recently passed. So it's also the Hilul Shmose, and it's a beautiful family. It's dated Yom Vav Aleph El Tovshin Ches. It's 2 years before the Rebbe's Nesius. The letter is fascinating in many levels, and I wish I could read the whole thing. I'll try to read as much as I can and explain it. But he's asking the Rebbe a question of Chassidus that touches upon the illness, and the Rebbe answers. But the Rebbe begins, interestingly, which is so apropos to our MyLife Essays Applied. The Rebbe writes, I'll just translate. I received your letter, and the questions that you ask are not klotz kashas. He clearly wrote to the Rebbe they're klotz kashas. Klotz kasha means, obvious, simple questions. He's almost apologizing for asking them because he doesn't get the basics. So the Rebbe writes, like you write in your letter, they're not klotz kashas. Va'adarabah. Here I do want to read in Hebrew. Neigim heim binyonim yesedim. They touch upon fundamental issues. Ela shemipnei shehurgelu behem. But because people got used to them, ein masimim lev l'techem. They do not pay attention to their content. Zeh gufa shemishtamshim behem li'itim tchufos. That itself, that people use these words again and again, very often, Gedim, it causes shenigma, that they imagine shemuvonim hem l'tachlisim, that they understand them completely. Even though after iyun, after proper applying yourself, a proper iyun would be probing or proper engrossing yourself in it, you see that many of them are difficult to understand and comprehend. And the Rebbe says, this is true with all wisdom and intelligence and science. The part that needs, more than anything else, real understanding and real depth, is the part that includes the muskolos hashenim, what we call the axioms of this particular science and its foundations. Shailas elu mesug zeh, questions in this category, kosher, are difficult to explain in a letter, especially because we don't have time to elaborate, so I will write only in brief. I just want to comment on this introduction. We follow this in Chinuch, in our Chassidus. It would change the whole way we teach Chassidus and Yeshivas. The Rebbe is saying words that we keep using again and again doesn't make you understand. On the contrary, that makes it even worse, because you can imagine that you start to understand them all. And then I was talking here specifically about the elements of Tzilah B'nai Yitzir. That's the question here. So I know people who know Chassidus, they'll tell you Sefer Kalam, Amal Kalam, Lifnei Tzimtzum, Lach Tzimtzum, Kav, Rishimo, Shviras Hakelim, Akudim, Akudim, Nekudim, Vrudim. The list goes on. Parsois, Spiris, Eris and Kalim, Mitziyarim, Bilta Mitziyarim, all the levels. And they understand the mathematics of it like a science. But the klotz kashas, so to speak, the Rebbe says, I'm not klotz kashas, often are missing. Because they're the foundation of it, why you're learning it, and what it means. And then the Rebbe goes even more fascinating in explaining this issue. What was the shaila? You ask, why is Elam Atzilus called Elam HaNelam, called Chai? Atzilus is called the world that's hidden from all living entities. Bria is called Elam HaKisei, the world of the throne, Kisei. Elam Yitzir is called the world of angels, and Elam Asir is called Elam HaGalgala, the world of the spheres. I'm talking about the spheres of the celestial bodies. Tshuva. The Rebbe basically says the following: everything that's done with seichel and chachma, with wisdom, has a purpose. So it means both the general thing and its details are all shaped to fulfill its purpose. Now, what's the purpose of the creation of the worlds? See, the Rebbe is going before Atzilus. Why is there Atzilus B'nai Yitzir in the first place? You don't hear that question asked. What they are, everyone can explain. But someone will ask, why did they exist in the first place? They exist in order to fulfill a purpose. What's the purpose? So the Rebbe says the purpose of all creation, as Razal said, is the Hasgalus Malchusi Yisbarach, called Shari Chudamuna Resh Perek Zayin, the revelation of the divine sovereignty. Kurum is gotten as a hinted also in the Pasuk, Yeshaya, Kol HaNikra B'Shmi, Ulukfedi Barosi Yitzati B'Afasisi. And as the Ovis in Sefer Perek Vav, the end of the 6th chapter, explains. The Rebbe continues. Now, just like everything below has a root above, the same thing is with Malchus Derakia, the heavenly kingdom, from which evolves the kingdoms below. And that's why, when you look and you study what the heavenly kingdom is like, you can learn what the customs are of a kingdom below. Like Razal say in Brachos. But the same thing is also the other way around. In order to understand somewhat how things work above, we can learn them according to the Hiros Chazal from seeing how kings and kingdoms and sovereignty is run below. Which explains why in the Midrashim you find Moshel HaMelech, example for a king, and all the different examples that you find, that we look at a human king to understand how God behaves, because God created a system in that fashion. Now there are different things we learn from kingdom. What do we learn? The Rebbe says that from the learning how a king relates to his nation, basically how a leader relates to his subjects, you learn several things. Number one you learn is that there's a separation between them, a distance. The king is beyond the people. Yeah. And therefore they have to have respect for him and offer him and so on and so forth. You have to stand with you don't call him by name, etc., etc. And at the same time, it also discusses a relationship. It's not just distance. He's their king. And they recognize to some extent his greatness. Another thing we learn is that the king is beyond being a king. There are elements of him that are beyond his being a king, his own private so-called entity. But a dimension of him, a more external dimension, it relates to his kingdom. So then the Rebbe continues, says, the personality of the king, how he is privately in his own way, has no relationship with the nation. That's why the Rebbe says, Ein Rei, so you don't see him when he's naked, without clothes and so on, because he's in his own world. But then there's the next level, how the king imagines and applies himself to the people. And imagines what their needs are and makes a plan how to give them their needs. So there, the people still don't have a relationship with him, but he has a relationship with them. Then there's the next stage, how the king goes out from his inner sanctum and goes and sits on the throne as he leads them. And he reveals to whom? To his ministers, the inner reasons behind his leadership and his decrees and so on. In his private chamber, obviously nobody is allowed in there. But at the same time, nobody forgets it's a king because that's his inner domain. And you don't need proof that he's a king because that's where he's in control. But then the king wants, the furthest is, he wants that his orders and his rulings should pass on, should be disseminated to all the people of the world, in this entire nation. So that's why he sends out shluchim, he sends out messengers to send them his decrees, and there he doesn't give a reason, he just tells them this is what he wants. All this the Rebbe says, "V'havdolas ein ketz, l'havdol elef havdolas ein ketz," is l'mayla. The way the Melech is but by himself is in yonim shalifnei atzimtzum. That's how the divine is before the tzimtzum. There's no connection to anything but himself. The Melech comes down and is beginning to imagine, envisioning the nation. That's Atzilus. So it's called Elam, but it's only the way he envisions it. That's why it's Nelam Me'en Kol Chai. That's why it's called Elam HaNelam. So there's already an Elam because he's already thinking about the nation, but it's within himself still. Then when he goes out into the outer chamber, that's Elam Abriya. That's how the king sits on the throne. That's Almid Diskasia and so on. Lower than that is the Malachim. They're the Shluchim that the Eibishter sends, that the Melech sends to the people. That's Yitzira. And they get the Pekudis, Kosher, Posel, Zakeh, Chayed. That's basically the rulings of Torah that are given to us. Until it reaches to the farthest edges of the Medina, that's Elam HaYesatach, that's Elam HaSiyah, Elam HaGalgalim, which are made of soul and body. That's the existence as we know it. That's the gist of it. So you have here from the Rebbe an explanation of 4 types of relationships we have with the king. The distance where he's on his own. There's how he begins to apply himself. There's how he really begins to connect to his ministers. They do get it. To the messengers, and finally to the nation, wherever they may be. In a different way, you can explain these 4 worlds also. And because time is limited, let me just be brief. Similar to based on the Rebbe's idea here, is that think of any structure, whether it's writing a book, whether it's architecture, whether it's music, anything, business plan, always begins with a vision, how you envision the idea, an outline. You flesh out the outline, that's Yitzira, Bria is the outline, and Asiya is the full-bodied final picture. So the way the world universe was created was with a logic. This logic is because God wanted the world to work with logic. So the four worlds can be applied in every given area of life. Ultimately, its lesson to us is each one has a value. The vision keeps you, the integrity, the truth of the message. But what's a vision without an outline? And what's an outline without a structure? And what's a structure without the final product? So every dimension adds to the others. Because time is limited, I'm going to stop here. Maybe I'll elaborate more if need be. If you have any questions on anything I've said, please write them to us. Let me go straight into the essays for these last few minutes. So again, 3 essays, 1 in Hebrew and 2 in English. The first one is Dealing with Sexual Addiction by Matisyahu Elon, age 40, software engineer, Tel Aviv. He tackles head-on the issue of challenges, sexual challenges, and typhus and so on, and how difficult it is. He uses a fictional character to describe it, so it makes it very personal. And talks about, he basically quotes the main source of Chassidus. He has a sikha from the Rebbe in Chelik Tazayin, the Kutei Sichos, the Bir Chavdalat Tevis, the 2 things that Alter Rebbe wrote, but right before his passing, the last Deres HaKedesh Simcha Chof, and Nefesh HaShvela, both focusing on Maisa Mitzvahs Gashmis, the mile of Gashmis, the Dafka in the physical world. You have Dafka in Afar, you say the Afar, the lowest element. You have the power to vegetation, to create forever and ever. The same thing, Nefesh HaShvela talks about the same thing, that the advantages of being Dafka in Gashmis. And the Rebbe asked a big question, that a tzaddik, his main life is neshama, especially coming to the end of his life. Here the focus is on Gashmis. And he elaborates on this in a very interesting way, comparing earlier generations to our times, that we cannot rely on the solutions that the Gemara in Menachos, for example, or other places talk about typhus. So we have to go into the world of understanding of how we have to focus on the positive. That's not about some way transforming, but going on the positive. When you can focus on the positive strength that you have in your life, that ultimately is the solution in dealing with these type of challenges. So this essay, as all these essays are being posted on meaningfullife.com/MyLife/contest. And if you subscribe to our weekly newsletter, we post every week the new essays. That's number 1. Essay number 2 is titled Finding God According to Chassidus, A Choice of Many Colors by Chana Rahmani, age 17, Roar Base High Academy, Brighton, Massachusetts. In a very creative way, it's written like a dialogue with God. Excuse me, God. Hi, I really could help you. I could really use some help right now. God does not respond. Nothing. Hello, can you even hear me? Please answer me, God. I just feel so alone. She goes into a journey through Chassidus, the eyes of Chassidus, how one builds a relationship with Eibishter, even though he's initially invisible, and how you can discover God in your life and in the dimensions of your own experience. It's a very creative way of applying Chassidus to basically a personal journey. Highly recommended to read as well. And how you find, as I said, the divine in your life experiences through the eyes of Chassidus. That's essay number 2. And finally, the last essay for this episode is Applying Tanya to life today. Applying Tanya to life today when the end is not even the beginning. By Shlomo Chaim Cohen, age 21, Mayarnot, Leeds, United Kingdom. And this one is taking Tanya, and like he opens up, he says, we live in a time with just one click, it takes you access across the globe. Takes you across the globe. With our fast-paced lifestyle, no one has nor needs patience to fix broken items, just with the press of a button. In spite of the above, we become frustrated when these quick fixes do not yield results that last. Seemingly, the results dissipate faster than they arrive. Can Chassidus offer us any insight in this pressing matter? And he goes through the journey of Kodev Elecha Davar Me'ed, Arucha K'tzar. What means Arucha K'tzar? And also very practical, applying the Tanya journey of solving problems to daily life today, and explaining it that it's not in a quick fix, but at the same time, it's something that when you begin to work on, you begin to see how it plays itself out and gives you mastery of your life. It talks about the Beinoni, and gives it actual steps of how there are three fundamental steps. First, realizing that you want to be a baby. Next, understand who you are, what makes you tick, and recognizing that each problem has its own solution. The solutions do not happen quickly. He gives an example of anger, a specific example of anger. Again, an essay worth reading, Tanya, as it applies itself to our lives. Well, as always, things go faster than you expect, but I hope I did justice to these different topics. They all deserve more discussion, no doubt. So I want to conclude by saying this has been MyLife Chassidus Applied episode 78, and it's an honor to continue this journey with you. Please send in your questions. This is a so-called interactive forum. Questions, especially the ones I addressed in the beginning about mental illness, which I plan to address in the coming weeks. We should always end on a good note, so may these days become days, we're already beyond that stage. Now we're at a stage of transformation, taking from the negative and turning it into the positive as we approach closer to the end of Menachem Av, into the month of El. Like the Rebbe said, we already can wish each other ksiv, some people say that the Gematria of Chamish Av, it says in Sfarim. Everyone should have a blessed New Year, even though we still have some time. But the seeds begin to be planted in Menachem Av, Mazel Aryeh, Rosh Tevis, El, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Tishrei Rabbah, as the Shalosh cites and the Rebbe explains. And Tzemach Tzedek brings and the Rebbe explains. So this has been MyLife Essays Applied, episode 78, every Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m. Everyone have a very blessed, simchadik week. Thank you very much.